Why do most Jews reject Jesus as the Messiah? The Jews rejected Jesus because he failed, in their eyes, to do what they expected their Messiah to do: destroy evil and all their enemies and establish an eternal kingdom with Israel as the preeminent nation in the world. The prophecies in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 describe a suffering Messiah who would be persecuted and killed, but the Jews chose to focus instead on those prophecies that discuss his glorious victories, not his crucifixion. The commentaries in the Talmud, written before the onset of Christianity, clearly discuss the messianic prophecies of Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and puzzle over how these would be fulfilled with the glorious setting up of the kingdom of the Messiah. After the Church used these prophecies to prove the claims of Christ, the Jews took the position that the prophecies did not refer to the Messiah, but to Israel or some other person. The Jews believed that the Messiah, the prophet which Moses spoke about, would come and deliver them from Roman bondage and set up a kingdom where they would be the rulers. Two of the disciples, James and John, even asked to sit at Jesus' right and left in his kingdom when he came into his glory. The people of Jerusalem also thought he would deliver them. They shouted praises to God for the mighty works they had seen Jesus do and called out, "Hosanna, save us," when he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, Matthew 21:9. They treated him like a conquering king. Then, when he allowed himself to be arrested, tried, and crucified on a cursed cross, the people stopped believing that he was the promised prophet. They rejected their Messiah, Matthew 27:22. Note that Paul tells the church that the spiritual blindness of Israel is a mystery that had not previously been revealed, Romans chapters 9 to 11. For thousands of years, Israel had been the one nation that looked to God while the Gentile nations generally rejected the light and chose to live in spiritual darkness. Israel and her inspired prophets revealed monotheism, one God who was personally interested in mankind's destiny of heaven or hell, the path to salvation, the written word with the 10 Commandments. Yet Israel rejected her prophesied Messiah, and the promises of the kingdom of heaven were postponed. A veil of spiritual blindness fell upon the eyes of the Jews, who previously were the most spiritually discerning people. As Paul explained, this hardening on the part of Israel led to the blessing of the Gentiles who would believe in Jesus and accept him as Lord and Savior. 2,000 years after he came to the nation of Israel as their Messiah, Christ is still, for the most part, rejected by the Jews. Many Jews today, some say at least half of all living Jews, identify themselves as Jewish but prefer to remain secular. They identify with no particular Jewish movement, and have no understanding or affiliation with any Jewish biblical roots. The concept of Messiah as expressed in the Hebrew Scriptures or Judaism's 13 principles of faith is foreign to most Jews today. But one concept is generally held as universal: Jews must have nothing to do with Jesus. Most Jews today perceive the last 2,000 years of historical Jewish persecution to be at the hands of so-called Christians. From the Crusades, to the Inquisition, to the pogroms in Europe, to Hitler's Holocaust, Jews ultimately believe that they are being held responsible for the death of Jesus Christ and are being persecuted for that reason. They, therefore, reject him today. The good news is that many Jews are turning to Christ today. The God of Israel has always been faithful to keep a remnant of believing Jews to himself. In the United States alone, some estimates say that there are over 100,000 Jewish believers in Jesus, and the numbers are growing all the time. Is Jesus the Messiah? Jesus is called the Messiah in Matthew 1:16. In fact, every time someone says, Jesus Christ, he is referring to Jesus as the Messiah, since Christ means Messiah or Anointed One. The Old Testament predicts the Messiah, and the New Testament reveals the Messiah to be Jesus of Nazareth. There are several things that the Jewish people who anticipated the Messiah expected him to be, based on Old Testament prophecies. The Messiah would be a Hebrew man, Isaiah 9:6, born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2, of a virgin, Isaiah 7:14, a prophet akin to Moses, Deuteronomy 18:18, a priest in the order of Melchizedek, Psalm 110:4, a king, Isaiah 11:1-4, and the son of David, Matthew 22:42, who suffered before entering his glory, Isaiah 53. Jesus met each of these messianic requirements. Jesus fulfilled the requirements of the Messiah in that he was a Hebrew of the tribe of Judah, Luke 3:30, and he was born in Bethlehem, Luke 2:4-7, to a virgin, Luke 1:26-27. Another proof that Jesus was the Messiah is the fact that he was a prophet like Moses. Both Moses and Jesus were prophets whom the Lord knew face to face, Deuteronomy 34:10, cf. John 8:38. But Jesus is an even greater prophet than Moses in that, while Moses delivered Israel from slavery, Jesus frees us from the bondage of death and sin. Unlike Moses, Jesus didn't just represent God, he is God, John 10:30. Jesus doesn't just lead us to the promised land, he takes us up to heaven for eternity, John 14:1-3. For these and many more reasons, Jesus is a prophet greater than Moses. The Messiah was to have priestly duties, Jesus was not a Levite, and only Levites were allowed to be priests. So how could Jesus qualify? Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, Genesis 14, Psalm 110:4, Hebrews 6:20. Melchizedek predated the Jewish temple, and his very name means King of Righteousness. Melchizedek was also called the King of Salem, which means King of Peace, Hebrews 7:2. Melchizedek blessed Abraham, the greater blesses the lesser, Hebrews 7:7, and Abraham gave Melchizedek a tithe. Thus, as a priest in the order of Melchizedek, Jesus is greater than Abraham, see John 8:58, and the Levitical priesthood. He is a heavenly priest who offered a sacrifice that removes sin permanently, not just temporarily covers it. Jesus must also be a king in order to be the Messiah. Jesus was from Judah, the kingly tribe. When Jesus was born, wise men from the east came looking for the King of the Jews, Matthew 2:1-2. Jesus taught that he would one day sit on a glorious throne, Matthew 19:28, 25:31. Many people in Israel saw Jesus as their long-awaited king and expected him to set up his rule immediately, Luke 19:11, although Jesus' kingdom is currently not of this world, John 18:36. At the end of Jesus' life, during his trial before Pilate, Jesus did not defend himself except to answer affirmatively when Pilate asked if he was the King of the Jews, Mark 15:2. Another way Jesus fits the Old Testament description of the Messiah is that he was the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. On the cross Jesus was despised and held in low esteem, Isaiah 53:3. He was pierced, verse 5, and oppressed and afflicted, verse 7. He died with thieves yet was buried in a rich man's tomb, verse 9, cf. Mark 15:27, Matthew 27:57-60. There are other ways in which Jesus is shown to be the Messiah. Each of the feasts of the Lord in the Old Testament is related to and fulfilled by Jesus. When Jesus came the first time, he was our Passover lamb, John 1:29, our unleavened bread, John 6:35, and our first fruits, 1 Corinthians 15:20. The pouring out of Christ's Spirit happened at Pentecost, Acts 2:1-4. When Jesus the Messiah returns, we will hear the shout of the archangel and the trumpet of God. It is no coincidence that the first fall festival day is Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. After Jesus returns, he will judge the earth. This is the fulfillment of the next fall festival, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Then Jesus will set up his millennial kingdom and reign from the throne of David for 1,000 years, that will complete the final fall festival, Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, when God dwells with us. To those of us who believe in Jesus as Lord and Savior, the proof that he is the Jewish Messiah seems overwhelming. How is it that, generally speaking, The Jews do not accept Jesus as their Messiah. Both Isaiah and Jesus prophesied a spiritual blindness upon Israel as a judgment for their lack of faith, Isaiah 6-9-10, Matthew 13-13-15. Also, most of the Jews of Jesus' time were looking for a political and cultural savior, not a savior from sin. They wanted Jesus to throw off the yoke of Rome and establish Zion as the capital of the world, see Acts 1:6. They could not see how the meek and lowly Jesus could possibly do that.